All right, welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. I'm Abby Robbins.
And I'm Kimberly Culbertson.
And today we are talking about Type 1 in relationship.
Dun, 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 dun. Type 1. Very exciting.
Kim definitely has a lot more energy than I do today. So
I'm actually just trying to force it this way. It's
okay.
working so well.
We're going to get through
Can
it.
you see it?
It's going to be good.
We're going to get through it because ones are so awesome.
Yes.
Their excellence is going to power us
Yes.
into this episode.
Man, everyone needs a 7 in their lives. I'm just going to say it. We're not even to the 7 episode yet, and you're just like...
But we're going to get there.
So we're starting off with what ones do really well in relationship. And start us off, Kim.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about my friendships with ones is that they really are so intentional about being a good, well, everything, but about being a good friend or a good spouse or a good teacher or a good whatever, however you're relating to that one. Now, their opinion about what is good and not, you might have some friction there, but they're really invested in doing relationship well.
Yeah.
And that is a huge gift.
Yeah. And I think, too, one of the things that I always talk about when I talk about ones and kind of what they bring to the table, ones have a massive amount of integrity.
Yes.
Right? So they're going to bring the same energy basically everywhere to their life, right? They're bringing kind of the same attention to detail. They're bringing the same level of commitment to whatever it is that they're shooting for, right? And they are wanting to be excellent. They're wanting to find what's wrong and fix it. And so they bring that vibe kind of everywhere. And for the most part, unless you get into a space where a one is having a really, really hard time, I mean, because it happens, ones generally are very consistent across the board. Like, what you see is what you get. Now, they're dealing with a lot of things internally, which might make relating hard or what have you, but they really are trying to put themselves forward in a way that we don't see, like, with a 3, who also might be geared towards excellence, but is not necessarily as intentional about showing up as themselves with this integrity. Not that 3s don't have integrity, but it's not as high value for them. And so I think that's really important to see in ones.
Sure. And then something that you kind of touched on is that they want to get it right. And so when there is a conflict with one, you are gonna have sometimes the most defensiveness.
Yes.
So because they have such a need to be doing things right that finding out that they've done it wrong is actually painful to ones.
Yeah.
But once they get past that, then they will do everything in their power to right the ship. And so you are in relationship with a person who is willing to do the work to get back to good, maybe more than any type, I think.
Yeah. So I think some of the struggles that we might see with ones in particular is that there is, I think you mentioned it kind of at the start, that if what you believe is good and what they believe is good are not the same good, life with that one is going to be pretty challenging.
That's true.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, sometimes I'm in spaces where there's a number of ones and they're in disagreement about what the metric is for success or for goodness. And that will be a fight. Because it's hard to move a one from their metric.
Yeah.
So ones are compliant type, but they are compliant to an internalized set of rules. Now, those rules are often inherited, or like crafted early. And so when a one is shifting out of one paradigm into another one, that is a time of chaos for a one, where they've realized the thing that I believed was good maybe isn't good.
Yeah.
And I think there's been some societal things where that has happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
In recent years. Like, I have a number of friends who believed a certain thing about the Republican Party, and Trump just wasn't what they believed about that.
Yeah.
Without getting super political, but it was very hard for them to go like, well, am I changing my metric about what political parties should be, or am I changing my metric about who I am and how I, and so
that's really challenging.
That is a time where you're gonna have a person that's really, really tense When they're
Even more so than one normally is.
When they're changing that metric,
Yeah.
it's very challenging. But if you disagree with them and they're not trying to change their metric, it's going to be hard to find compromise.
Yeah. Yeah, that integrity is a double-edged sword, like most things in the Enneagram.
Maybe every single thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? What I think is really interesting about this is we've really kind of highlighted the struggle being in relationship with ones, is that if a one is not interested in shifting their paradigm, then relating to them is going to be incredibly difficult. And
when you're in disagreement.
When you're in disagreement, right? Like, well, and truly, even if you are in agreement, things might be going smoothly, but there's a sense of kind of, if you're in a relationship with a one, there can be a sense of feeling like you're kind of put in a box, right? So there's kind of this sense of, well, I mean, this is fine right now, but there's like a deep knowing that like, if I were over here, things would not be good. And that creates a really deep sense of insecurity in the relationship. And a struggle that ones really have is they add to that by their criticism of who they're in relationship with.
Right.
We know that one's criticism of others and the outside environment comes from an internal experience, right? Like they are so critical of themselves, right, against this metric that they've gotten built up, that criticism just kind of seeps out to everyone else.
And they're critical of themselves on behalf of changing for the better. Like, I need to get better at being good. And so even though it is often painful, it's also to be helpful.
Yeah.
And so when they direct that at their people, it is also to be helpful. Like they mean well when they're saying you should really be doing it like this, or they have some helpful constructive criticism for you. But because there's so much of that, they're so aware of where things are not meeting the metrics. It can over time really weigh on the relationship because there's so many opinions of how it could be better. Yeah.
And so, there can be a sense when you're in a relationship with a one, even if you agree kind of at the outset of your relationship, whether it's a friendship or whatever, that like ones are kind of always communicating this rubric, whether they know it or not, right? And it can show up as, very clear and like direct criticism or conflict or those sorts of things. It also comes out in passive-aggressive comments, the small snide things, the jokes that they tell, right?
And
like
ones are in the body center.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of nonverbal cueing from ones where like their whole body will stiffen when you're doing something they don't like. So even if you're like, what? And they're like, I didn't say anything. It's like your whole body is saying a thing.
You've said so much without opening your mouth.
Right.
Yeah.
And they may not even be conscious of it.
Yeah.
Because they're choosing not to voice it, but they are in that body center. They do live an embodied experience, and so.
And I think that's the thing is like it's ones generally, and you feel it if you've been around ones often enough, they carry an immense amount of tension in their bodies. Yeah. They are tense people. They're high strung. They're a little wound up. And you can feel it. You can feel it when you're around them. Even ones that I know that have done an immense amount of work, right? Like there's still that like really tight string in the center that you can kind of pluck and you see them,
It's so true.
But the thing is, they don't necessarily know that they're tense. Right, and we could go around the Enneagram and we could talk about how each one of us has something that we're doing that we don't know that we're doing it because it's the water we swim in. Right? I did not know that I was intense until I learned the Enneagram.
Sorry.
It's true though. I had no clue. I did not see myself that way. I did not experience myself that way. But
you thought everybody else was fucking boring.
Well, weak little babies is the immediate little like word that came into my head just then. I don't actually think that, but like there was
babies.
there was something about like, well, they're just not like on my level, right?
Okay.
It wasn't that I was intense, right? But the same thing is true of ones, right?
Yeah,
When you
yeah.
look at that, and ones don't know they're tense, but they can often see the rest of us as lazy or slobs or whatever. Like
Yeah.
that's because we're not operating with
Like
the same
undisciplined,
tension. Yeah.
like I think of ones sort of like when somebody's been to boot camp in the military,
Mm-hmm.
they the way they carry their body is different.
Yeah.
Because they're very specific about how they need to carry their body as a soldier. And I feel like ones have some of that same physical energy of like they're ready to do the best job.
Yeah.
And they stay alert to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so where every other type you can kind of, there's a lot of times they're less alert even. The one, it's rare that the one really lets their guard down fully.
Yeah.
So much so that they might not even know what that would look like.
And
like, this
that
is it.
becomes something that's really scary for them.
True.
Right? That
Yeah,
becomes something, right? Because as we look at, kind of what lies beyond our, our type, what lies beyond our personality, that's a threatening question to ask. That's a threatening thing to think about because our personality is here to protect us. And what's on the other side of this protection is vulnerable. A lack of safety. Yeah, it's vulnerable. We could be hurt. We could be whatever.
Yes.
But it actually kind of brings us into the work for ones, right? Which is a little bit of relaxation.
Yeah.
Right? It's a terrifying proposition for a one, but like learning to like let the tension in the body ease, it's so valuable.
And it's hard even when ones are open to it because intrinsically the first thing that happens is you try to do the best relaxing. Like I'm going to be so good at relaxing. So even for the relaxation and for the letting the guard down, there's a rubric of like a good person will relax in this way, will experience this in this way.
Yeah, it's so insidious the way that a one's kind of perfectionism or like desire to like hit this rubric, it really plays into their work. Like capital W work. And I've been coaching clients for 6-7 years now. And I think I've had 3 ones, like total.
What are your thoughts about why that is?
Well, I think it's exactly what you said. There is a lot of difficulty in, first of all, admitting you're wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel like coaching is like admitting you need help.
Yeah.
And the desire is to like,
that.
I'm good enough to not need intervention, to not need to work on things.
Yeah. And then even when they do come in the door, it's a very, very tenuous kind of therapeutic relationship. Like they're not really willing to give in to the process. Even, and I've heard, anecdotally from, therapists that like it's a similar thing in therapy. I think generally ones might be more geared towards therapy than like coaching, which is more of what I do. And I think it's because there is an understanding that there's a lot of repressed emotion, right? Like ones know that they're not like feeling people. Like they have that understanding about themselves, because feelings might be seen as inappropriate or too much or they don't. Like feelings often don't fit into the rubric.
Yeah.
And so they know that, and so then they're like, okay, well I'm seeing how feelings could fit into the rubric, but I don't have the skill set. So they're more likely, I think, to go to therapy than something like coaching, which is like. Where are you? Where do you want to be? How do we get there?
It makes me wonder, just like side note, if we are in a society in Western American culture where feelings are not very honored.
No.
And I'm wondering if in a culture where feelings were more honored, would their rubric have more space for feelings?
Yeah.
It's neither here nor there, but it's making me curious.
Yeah.
Because one thing I've started to think about a lot with the Enneagram is, like, is this true?
Across the board?
Or is this like the way it presents in, the majority culture here, the zeitgeist of the times, you know. Anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But one's, their work really lies in learning how to relax, learning how to open up to relationship, learning how to
I think be wrong.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to be in a relationship with another human being, you are sometimes going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
Which by itself, like, probably everyone watching this just went like, ugh.
Nah, no.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you are never wrong in your relationship, that's going to suck for the person that you're dating too.
Well, and it sets up this thing that, like, when we're in conflict, what we're really trying to do is create a shared reality. Right? Like, I have a world and you have a world, and when we're in conflict, those two worlds are, what we're trying to do in conflict is we're trying to bring those two worlds together. And that's often done, and that's most effectively and efficiently done by, compromise isn't a word I like generally as an 8. That makes me feel a little, but there is this, like, sharing of right and wrong to create a new world. Right, that is shared together. And if you're always right, then you're just demanding that the people in your lives live in your world without any say or influence over what it is that you're living in together.
Yeah, and the picture that I'm getting as I'm listening to you is of like a bending toward or an intertwining.
Yeah.
And ones can be so rigid that it feels dangerous to bend or to intertwine. But then the experience is the other person has to do all of the bending. And what you get is not like a comfortable embrace. What you get is like is lopsided. And I think ones have to make space for the fact there are things where, like, this is right and this is wrong. And ones, they live in that black and white a lot more than a lot of us. But there are definitely things where what is right for you is not what is right for another person.
Yeah, it starts to become relative. Ones have a lot of difficulty with relativity, right? That, like, something could be right for them and the absolute right thing and could be exactly wrong for another person. Ones really struggle with that.
Yeah. And that can be really detrimental to relationships, because sometimes what you're trying to do then is convince somebody to do something that feels wrong for them based on it being right for you.
Yeah.
And that can be really damaging. And so I think a lot of the work is in being in the work, at least in relationship, is in learning how to dance instead of pose. Yeah. To move with another person and have enough flexibility to still be who you are, to not shift and change who you are, to still hold your principles while creating enough space for them to explore theirs in a way that is complementary and enjoyable for you guys.
Yeah, that's great. I love that, dance instead of pose. I think that's super solid. I think the other thing, this is not the first time we've tried to record this episode of the podcast, and one thing that I said in a previous take that I feel super strongly about with ones is, like, we talked a lot about work for ones being listening. Ones are not, straight out of the box, very good listeners, because they're so focused on this internal rubric that everything else is just kind of mindless chatter, right? And so that can come off as condescending, that can come off as dismissive to the people in relationship. So learning how to listen is a really important piece for ones. And it's really important because, and I said this in the last take and I feel really strongly about it, it's just like, as a one, you are not always right about what you're wrong about. Ones in relationship, especially if they've been doing the work, can start to become good at admitting where they're bad, right? Like admitting where they're wrong.
Yes. Okay, but I remember. I don't even remember this. Okay.
But it's like they've chosen what they can handle, what they have the capacity to admit to. And it may be something that they've done wrong, but it might not be what the person is upset about, what the other person, the person on the receiving end, is hurt by. And so there's this, like, balancing act that ones are trying to do, like, oh, well, I'll cop to all these things and we can work on these pieces, but the person on the other side of the conversation is like, that's, I don't actually care about those things. I care about this. And then the one shifts back into defensive mode and is like, well, now you're just being so critical because I'm bringing all these things to the table and you don't care and blah, blah, blah. Like, this is the dialogue that's happening. But when the one can really sit and listen, right, then they can hear what the other person is bringing to the table, right? Whether that's in a team setting, or if they're a manager, or they're being managed, or they're in an intimate relationship with someone. One's, because they struggle, right? Because ones struggle to admit what they've done wrong, and culturally, we have an understanding that it's good to take accountability for what you've done wrong.
Yeah, depending a little where you are, but yes.
Right, at least in these circles where we're at, these personal growth circles, right? So ones take that and then use their type with it to create a space where, well, I'm wrong about this. Everything else is fine. But I can admit to this.
Yeah.
Right, so they're presenting something as work, but they're not listening to how they may be harming the other people in the relationship because they're not paying attention. They're not willing to allow that influence in because it can feel so unsafe. And I think this is why ones rely on that internal rubric, is it's a way to maintain control, right? So to be at the whim of other people, right, seems chaotic and scary and unsafe, right? Or even just the whim of the universe in general, right? Like, ones are trying to bring order from chaos, and they do that by this internal rubric. Like, if I can just control myself, the rest will follow.
Yeah, and I think to come back to what you're saying, I think it makes it, I want to be careful and not make it seem like they're doing that necessarily on purpose.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, it's possible that they are, but it's unlikely in the sense that our personality and our ego are always standing in front of us trying to protect us, right?
Yeah.
And so they're looking at what is palatable, like, I can handle this. But then the other piece of it is that, just like with everything, that ones want to do well, ones want to do apologies well. And so they tend to bring their apology pre-formed.
Yeah.
Because...
like, I've got it worked out.
They go like, oh man, that did not go well. They go away, they analyze it themselves, they figure out what they did wrong, they come back and say, okay, I understand, I did this wrong, I'm sorry for this. They give you a great apology for that. And then that's not actually quite the thing. And if you try to tell them that, now you're back again at the beginning. And so...
that's not one. What's so interesting about it is that kind of apology, it's not connective, right?
Right.
Because it's one-sided. Like, once there was a conflict, there was an issue, they went back, they tried to fix it, they figured it out on their own, they came back and they presented it. And so by function of being in relationship, there has to be more give and take. For the ones. And
one thing that we've talked about in previous episodes, and if you haven't seen it, go find it, but we've talked about conflict resolution styles. And part of this comes in here because the one is in the competency style. And so they're going like, I'm going to get better at this. And we need that.
Yeah. I want the solution. Like, how do we make sure this never happens again?
Yeah. But because of the way that ones tend to do that, they don't hear the emotional realness from people who require that to feel like a conflict is resolved.
Oh, they don't hear it from anyone.
Well, I mean, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Especially ones in relationship with people who need to say, like, I just need you to hear how this felt in my heart.
Yeah.
They're like, that's uncomfortable. I'm going to be better. And what people often want from their one is to listen.
Yeah.
And to say, like, I really want to understand what you're saying. And then consider that and respond to that.
Yeah.
And that is really hard to pre-plan for. Like, if you think
you
of
can't.
ones...
You can't do it.
Like, if life is a test...
It's not hard. It's impossible.
You're constantly studying for the test.
Oh,
like, this is a pop quiz. Like, there's no way to know exactly what the other person is experiencing from you unless you listen. But that's the most dangerous thing. Yeah. Because you can't know ahead of time how you're going to respond in the right way necessarily.
So shifting into how do we support the ones in our lives, right? So again, if you're on the other side, it can be really easy to slip into that reactivity, right? You're not listening, you never listen, right? Like, you can just go down the list, right? I think one of the biggest things we can do for ones is hold them accountable while letting them know that like our opinion of them has not changed.
Yes.
Right? That like, hey, you fucked up. I still love you. I still think you're a great person. I'm still stoked to be in a relationship with you. And this needs to be addressed. This is, you know, ones are, maybe the one invented the compliment sandwich. But like, if they did, maybe threes invented it, but like ones really need it, right?
Yeah.
Because anytime criticism is coming in, right, ones, until they have done a massive amount of work, they can't take it in without becoming extremely reactive.
Because their identity is
Yes.
so rooted in doing things the right way.
Yeah, and
so
it's like
it's an identity shot.
Yeah, it's like I'm telling you something you've done wrong, but all you're hearing is how you are not
wrong.
the person you thought you were.
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Oh
Which,
my God, yes.
If we look at the places where we are most identified, that's where you're going to find the most conflict and pushback across the board, right? Like, you tell me that I'm weak, I'm going to kick you in the throat. Like, not actually, but like wherever you have the most identification, that's where you'll be, at least in the shins, right? That's where you'll be the most reactive and the most defensive. Right, and so literally any conflict for a one becomes the place, right? The place that's designed to be the place where we connect and build this like shared reality. Ones experience it as like, I have to be so armored up.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
And so doing a lot of this work to kind of like soften, even set the stage beforehand, like, I love you, I'm interested in the continuance of this relationship, you're good at what you do, blah, 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 whatever it is, whatever's appropriate for the relationship. And then presenting the difficult thing and then immediately following it up with like, and like, I understand this is not a reflection of who you are, this is just something that got missed, right? Or... And sometimes it is more tender, you know, as you, the person being hurt.
Sure. Yeah.
But like, this is how we support them, is we have to do the work to create that space.
And I think giving them the benefit of the doubt, even though like we might bristle under criticism ourselves, going like, I know you're trying to help me, but that's not feeling well. Like to start with, like, I know what you're trying to do here, but I actually need this from you. And so with that benefit of the doubt, to be able to tell them exactly what you need, which is easier said than done because we often don't know what we need. But there are times when we do. And so to be able to say, I want to tell you how this felt for me, and I just want you to listen and try to understand what I'm saying. And so by giving sort of some metrics before a conversation, there is a certain amount of translation that you can do to say like this is the way their brain works. That's the way their brain thinks. So like, here's what a really successful outcome of this conversation would look like for me. I would feel like this is what happened. So I just want to let you know, because it's really important for me to stay in a relationship with you, and I really appreciate this about you, or whatever. Depends on the relationship, what kind it is. But to say like, you are important to me. It's important to me that we get through this in a way that is both productive and meaningful, and this is what success will look like. Can be just wildly helpful and such a gift to one, because then they are still going to feel all that vulnerability, but they have some sort of framework in which
you've created a container that makes it feel safer for them to step into that. I think ones generally, if we want to support them, we have to do the work of like honoring intent. Like acknowledging and honoring the intent of a person while presenting the impact as, hey, it didn't land right. And that's a...
And because the one's work is almost opposite.
Well, because that's almost always 100% of the time, like 99.999% of the time when you present something to a one, like, hey, you're being critical or whatever, it's not conscious, right? It's faster than our consciousness. It's so deeply just like reflex for them to be like, well, that's not what I meant.
Right.
I intended it to be this. Right, and so they are so concerned with their intent that they can't acknowledge their own impact, and so so it's reversed. Like, that's the work for the one, and then we support the one by like, hearing their intent.
Yeah, yes.
Right? Because so much of the time, one's, like, generally speaking, across the board, around the Enneagram, no one is trying to hurt you. Just like, unless you're dealing with a straight up narcissist sociopath, which you likely are not. Like,
That's true, you're likely not.
Statistically, that's not likely. So just like, if you think someone in your life is a narcissist, like, stop. Just stop. People are not trying to hurt you intentionally, and that is so true for most, again, 99% of the ones that I've interacted with. They don't want to hurt anyone. They hurt a lot of people, but never is it intentional. Just like I hurt a lot of people. None of it's intentional.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's intentional, but again, that's, you know.
Well, I don't know if I totally agree. I do think, especially in conflict when we're reactive, there are times where we, on a normal day, don't want to hurt somebody, but we say a thing because we know it's going to, like, land.
But I think
ones
different.
are the least likely to do it.
Well, I would go as far as to say that isn't even conscious either.
Well, true.
We may think it and we may say it because we know it will end the conflict or it will whatever. But in those, even in those moments when someone's saying something shitty and they know it's shitty, they're doing it out of defense.
Right.
They're not doing it straight up just to be a jerk. You know, generally speaking. And again. That's kind of my take on it. Is like, even in those moments where, like, I've said something shitty, I look back and was like, I really didn't want to hurt that person, but I was so afraid. It was like, you know, an animal gnawing their leg off to get out of a trap, like that sort of vibe. Don't do that. Don't play that game. But it's that same thing. Is like, I don't think that when we are conscious of what we're doing, I don't think that we hurt people.
I agree.
I mean, intentionally. Like,
and I think we all know it because we've had that moment where we say the thing,
and then you're immediately
like, oh God, why did I say that?
Yeah, right. So it's like,
you know, you feel it land because you're in relationship with that person.
Yeah. So that's how you can support ones, right? Like, honoring their intent. I think that that's really good, and
reminding them that the relationship is not at stake.
Yeah.
Assuming it's not. I mean, there are times where, like, this mistake is so big you're going to be fired.
We might even say, let the one know the stakes.
Right. Yes. Better. Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, most of the time, assuming we want to stay in relationship, we are having a conversation on behalf of staying in that relationship, and so to say, what you did was not okay, but you're not going to lose me.
Yeah.
That is what will create the safety enough to manage the fact that they did something that was not okay.
I even would go as far as to say, for ones, if you're in a relationship with a one, especially like an intimate relationship with a one, doing this frequently, right? So, like, the things,
therapy.
Right? There's so many things in the Enneagram that, like, if done often enough with the right people and the right kind of container, we're going to develop, at very least, a tolerance for it, if not like a full open conscious capacity for it. Like, we'll at least build a tolerance for that kind of thing. And so coming to these kinds of sensitive, you know, you could even make it like a check-in, like, okay, here's what we're working with. We're going to do this on a weekly or monthly basis, and we're going to check in around certain things, right? Like, where I think we missed each other or where we could have connected better.
Especially if you're in a place where you need repair.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't do that forever with the one.
Well, and there is some ways that I think some ones might really jive with it, right? Like, it becomes part of their
They know when it's coming. They know how to manage it.
Right? Yeah. They can prepare themselves for it. That's one thing that I think is really hard for ones, is that often when someone in their relationship is, like, coming to them saying, like, oh, you've hurt me or whatever, they're so caught off guard. They don't stand a chance, right? I mean, it's true. Like, they when
it does suck to put that much energy into being good and doing the right thing, and then
getting told that you didn't.
Still sometimes not do the right thing. Like, what a bummer.
Right? You put in all this energy, and that's life, right? We're all putting tons of energy into, like, whatever our thing is, and then turns out we don't get it. It sucks.
Dang.
Like, so having, like, regular check-ins with your one could be really supportive, because then they have time to prepare. Like, okay, I know this is coming. I know I'm going to have to do this, and here's how I can show up to it better. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, you can find out more about my work at consciousenneagram.com.
And we're at KimberlyandCoach.com.
Be sure to hit the like button if you liked anything in this video, found it useful. Don't forget to subscribe.
Please.
And if you're a 1, drop a comment down below. Let us know how we did. If you're in a relationship with a 1, let us know what was helpful or what you found helpful in relating to your 1. Yeah, I will see y'all in the next one.
Cheers.